In the mist-shrouded valleys of northern Vermont, where ancient maple trees stand sentinel over winding dirt roads, a story of quiet expertise and calculated retribution was about to unfold. Nestled between rolling hills and dense forest, the town of Millbrook Valley had been home to the same crafts and trades for generations. Among them was Ezra Thane, the last true wheelwright in 3 counties, whose weathered workshop sat at the edge of town like a guardian of forgotten arts. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. At 68, Ezra's hands still moved with the precision of a surgeon as he shaped wood and metal into perfect circles that would carry wagons, carts, and restored carriages across the countryside. To most, he was just another aging craftsman, holding on to a dying trade in a world that had largely forgotten the value of handcrafted wheels. They didn't know that his understanding of physics, mechanics, and material stress points had once made him the most innovative trap designer in the Western military's classified research division. The morning frost painted delicate patterns on Ezra's workshop windows as he examined a complex mechanism hidden beneath his workbench. His old German Shepherd forge lay nearby, ears perked at the sound of approaching vehicles. Through the grimy windows, 3 black SUVs crawled past his property, moving with the predatory slowness of wolves sizing up prey. Ezra's weathered hands never paused in their work, but his eyes, sharp as ever, tracked the vehicle's movement with military precision. Maria Chen, his closest neighbor and the town's only veterinarian, pulled up in her mud-splattered pickup truck. Just as the SUVs disappeared around the bend, her face carried the tight expression of someone bearing bad news. "They got to Harrison's place," she said without preamble, climbing down from her truck. "Whole family cleared out last night. This morning, those same black SUVs were parked in their driveway, and men in expensive suits were measuring the property." Ezra set down his tools carefully, each movement deliberate. "The Harrisons had that land for 4 generations. Word is, these people aren't giving anyone a choice. They show up with offers way above market value, but if you refuse..." Maria glanced over her shoulder, lowering her voice. "Coleman's barn burned down 3 days after he told them no. Police called it an accident, but everyone knows better." Ezra nodded slowly, his mind already calculating angles, pressure points, and reaction times, old habits from a career spent designing devices that could stop armies in their tracks. "They're working their way through the valley systematically," he observed, reaching down to scratch Forge behind the ears. "Taking key properties, establishing a pattern. They're calling themselves Verde Development Group," Maria continued, her hands gripping her coffee mug tightly. "But Peterson at the bank says their paperwork leads back to shell companies linked to the Cortez Syndicate. They're turning rural properties into distribution networks, using legitimate businesses as cover." "Makes sense," Ezra replied, his tactical mind mapping the valley's layout. Isolated locations, existing structures, minimal oversight, perfect for their kind of operation. He walked to his workbench, where an intricate wheel mechanism lay partially assembled. To untrained eyes, it looked like any other piece of craftwork. Only someone with extensive mechanical knowledge would recognize the subtle differences, the hidden complexities that could transform it from a simple wheel into something far more dangerous. "Ezra?" Maria hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "These aren't ordinary criminals. They're organized, well-funded. The sheriff's out of his depth, and state police won't move without solid evidence. Nobody else will stand up to them." Ezra's fingers traced the wheel's circumference, feeling the precise grooves he'd carved into the wood. "Don't worry about me, Maria. I've dealt with worse in my time." As Maria drove away, Ezra whistled for Forge to follow him into the workshop's back room. Behind a false wall panel lay a space that would have shocked his neighbors. A fully equipped design studio with advanced drafting tables, precision, tools and detailed schematics of mechanical devices that had helped shape modern military defense doctrine. His phone buzzed with a message from an old contact in the Defense Department. Cortez Syndicate moving fast. 8 properties acquired in the last 6 weeks. Watch your back. Ezra pulled out detailed topographical maps of the valley, his trained eye identifying key tactical positions. His property sat at a crucial intersection, controlling access to 3 different approach routes. No wonder they wanted it. The sound of vehicles on the main road caught his attention again. Through his window, he watched the black SUVs make another pass, their tinted windows reflecting the morning sun. Their mapping approaches, Forge, Ezra murmured to his dog, but they don't know what they're walking into. He spent the next few hours making calls to old colleagues from his days at the Advanced Defense Research Division, men and women who'd helped him develop the trap systems that had revolutionized modern military defense. His first call went to Dr. Sarah Blackwood, former head of mechanical engineering at ADRD. Ezra, been years since anyone heard from you. What's wrong? Remember Project Labyrinth, Sarah? The integrated defense system we designed for urban warfare, the one that was too advanced for field deployment. Government said it was too effective, worried about civilian casualties if it ever leaked. Need your expertise. Got some people moving into the valley, taking properties by force. They'll be here soon. A low whistle came through the phone. Need some help setting up a welcome party. Might not hurt to have the old team together. One last project. By afternoon, his plans were in motion. 4 of his former colleagues were en route. Sarah Blackwood, with her genius for mechanical integration. Marcus Chen, no relation to Maria, specializing in pressure-triggered systems. Dr. James Rivera, expert in electronics and sensors. And Dr. Lisa Wong, whose understanding of material stress points had helped them create devices that seemed to defy physics. Together, they'd designed defense systems that could turn entire territories into impassable mazes. The Cortez Syndicate wouldn't know what they were walking into. A dog's bark from outside alerted Ezra to more vehicles approaching. The same SUVs, this time stopping at his gate. He straightened his back, adjusted his worn work apron, and prepared to play the role of a simple craftsman. Let them think he was harmless. Let them underestimate him. It was a mistake they would only make once. 5 men emerged from the SUVs, their tailored suits as out of place in rural Vermont as palm trees. Ezra counted 2 more staying with the vehicles, their stances betraying military training. Victor Cortez himself led the group, his Italian leather shoes collecting mud as he approached. His smile was practiced, professional, but his eyes held the cold calculation of a predator. Mr. Thane, Cortez extended his hand, the casual arrogance of someone used to getting his way evident in every movement. Your reputation as a craftsman precedes you. I understand you're the last wheelwright in the region. Ezra took the offered hand, noting the man's grip strength and the calluses that suggested regular firearms training. Just keeping an old trade alive, he replied mildly, playing the role of an aging artisan while his mind catalogued every detail of their positions, their weapons, their tactical formation. 2 men moved toward his workshop, trying to appear casual. In their inspection, their movements were too precise, too measured, former military, probably Mexican special forces based on their bearing. They were looking for defensive positions, not admiring his craftsmanship. We represent a development group, Cortez continued, gesturing to the valley beyond. We're investing heavily in this region, modernizing properties, bringing in new opportunities. Your workshop. He paused, dark eyes scanning the weathered building. It has certain features that interest us. Ezra leaned against his workbench, appearing relaxed while mentally marking fields of fire and calculating response times. Not interested in selling, he said simply. Got too much history here. Cortez's smile tightened slightly. Perhaps I wasn't clear. We're prepared to offer significantly above market value, 3 million cash, more than generous for a property this size. Ezra picked up a partially finished wheel, his fingers tracing the intricate spokes, while watching the two men by his equipment storage. They were examining his security cameras, not realizing the real surveillance system was hidden within the seemingly ancient wood carvings adorning his workshop. "Money isn't everything," Ezra replied, noting how the men had positioned themselves in a standard intimidation formation. "Some things aren't for sale." The friendly facade cracked slightly as Cortez stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Mr. Thane, let me be direct. This valley is changing. Progress, you might say. You can be part of that change and profit from it, or? Ezra's voice remained calm, even as he noticed one of the men by his storage shed speaking quietly into a radio. Or you might find that running a business becomes very difficult. Accidents happen, especially to stubborn old men who don't know when to take a good deal. Ezra straightened slowly, allowing just a hint of steel to enter his voice. "Sounds like a threat, Mr. Cortez." A flicker of surprise crossed Cortez's face at the use of his real name, a name Ezra shouldn't have known. It was a calculated slip, letting them know he wasn't as ignorant as he appeared. "Simply stating facts," Cortez recovered quickly. "The valley is changing. Fighting it would be unwise." One of the men by the workshop called out in Spanish, something about finding unusual modifications to the building's structure. Ezra had let them spot the obvious reinforcements, hiding his real defensive installations in plain sight, disguised as traditional craftsman's tools and architectural features. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Think about it," Cortez said, producing a business card. "You have 24 hours. After that, the offer becomes significantly less generous." Ezra took the card, noting the fake company name, Standard Criminal Organization Front. "I'll sleep on it. See that you do." Cortez turned to leave, then paused, looking at Forge. "Beautiful dog, German Shepherd, yes? Would be a shame if something happened to him." Forge growled softly, picking up on the threat. Ezra kept his hand gentle on the dog's head, but his voice carried the weight of decades of experience designing the world's deadliest defensive systems. That would be a very serious mistake. Something in his tone made Cortez hesitate. For just a moment, the mask slipped, and Ezra saw genuine uncertainty cross the man's face. They had expected an easy mark, a simple craftsman they could bully or buy out. Instead, they'd caught a glimpse of something else, something that set off warning bells. As the SUVs pulled away, Ezra's phone buzzed with a message from Sarah Blackwood. 3 hours out, team assembled, bringing the special equipment from Project Labyrinth. Inside his workshop, Ezra activated his real security system. Cameras hidden, in hand-carved decorations covered every approach, and pressure sensors, disguised as traditional foundation stones, monitored the perimeter. Everything fed into a command center concealed behind his antique tool display, a holdover from years of designing defensive systems that could turn entire military bases into impenetrable fortresses. He pulled up satellite images of the valley, marking known syndicate properties. 8 properties taken in 6 weeks, each one strategic. His land was the missing piece, controlling the main valley access point and providing clear lines of sight for miles. His phone rang. Maria again. "Ezra, they were at your place, weren't they? I saw those SUVs. What did they want?" "Just a friendly business proposition," Ezra replied, checking the mechanisms on a particularly complex wheel design that could transform from innocent craftsmanship to lethal trap in seconds. "Nothing to worry about." "Don't lie to me." Maria's voice was tight with concern. "Harrison tried to stand up to them. Next day, his barn burned down. The day after that, his wife's car crashed on a perfectly straight road. No witnesses. Maria, listen carefully, Ezra said, his voice calm but firm. Next few days, stay with your sister in Burlington. Don't tell anyone where you're going. Ezra, what are you planning? Better you don't know. Just trust me. After. Hanging up with Maria, Ezra descended into the hidden cellar beneath his workshop. Unlike the rustic workspace above, this space looked like something out of a military research facility. Advanced drafting tables lined the walls, covered in complex mechanical designs. Display screens showed feeds from his hidden surveillance network, while specialized tools for precision engineering filled custom-built workstations. The cellar had another secret. Beneath a false section of flooring lay his private archive. Here, in temperature-controlled storage, rested the blueprints and prototypes that had revolutionized military defense technology. Projects even the government had deemed too effective for deployment. Designs that could turn terrain itself into an impenetrable defense system. Dr. Sarah Blackwood arrived first, her electric car silent as it pulled up to the workshop. Despite being in her 60s, she moved with the energy of someone half her age, her silver hair pulled back in a practical braid. She carried what appeared to be ordinary luggage, but Ezra knew better. Inside would be the specialized equipment they'd developed for Project Labyrinth. Place looks exactly the same, she said, studying the workshop's exterior, though I suspect appearances are deceiving. Good to see you, Sarah. Ezra led her inside, Forge padding along beside them. How's retirement treating you? About as well as it's treating you, I'd guess. Still designing? Just wheels these days, Ezra replied, activating the hidden mechanism that revealed the cellar entrance, though some designs are more special than others. Sarah's eyes lit up as they descended into his real workspace. My God, Ezra, you've kept everything. She moved to a drafting table where complex mechanical drawings lay spread out. Are these new? The integration of pressure points is brilliant. You've evolved the labyrinth concepts. Had a lot of time to think. Ezra activated the main display screen, showing the valley's topography. Been adapting our old designs for civilian application, less lethal, but just as effective at area denial. The sound of another vehicle approaching caught their attention. On the security feed, they watched Marcus Chen's battered pickup truck pull up. The former stress mechanics expert had aged well, his lean frame still carrying the coiled energy of a much younger man. The large crates in his truck bed would look like ordinary construction materials to any observer. Marcus, Sarah greeted him warmly, still hauling around enough equipment to rebuild a small city. Never know what you might need, he replied, his eyes scanning the workshop's exterior. Though I suspect Ezra's already got most of what we need built into this place. Those look like standard support beams, but the spacing... He trailed off, noting the carefully calculated structural elements that could transform the entire building into an elaborate mechanical trap. As they helped Marcus unload, Dr. James Rivera's hybrid SUV pulled up, followed closely by Dr. Lisa, Wong's practical sedan. The team that had once designed the Western military's most advanced defensive systems was reuniting, though this time their battlefield would be a small Vermont valley. Status report, Sarah said once they were all assembled in the cellar. What exactly are we dealing with? Ezra pulled up surveillance footage of Cortez's visit. Cortez syndicates moving into the valley, taking properties systematically. They're professional, well-funded, and not afraid to use force. Thermal imaging shows they've got at least 30 men in the area, Lisa noted, studying the feeds. Military training based on their movement patterns. Probably Mexican special forces who went private. They're setting up a distribution network, Marcus added, unpacking equipment that looked deceptively simple but contained cutting-edge mechanical components. Using legitimate businesses as cover. This valley's perfect for their needs, isolated multiple access routes, existing infrastructure. And they want your property because it controls the main valley access point, James finished, already setting up his electronic warfare suite. Classic bottleneck position. They'll be back, Ezra confirmed, bringing up his latest designs, and they won't take no for an answer. Question is, are you all sure you want to be involved? This isn't a government contract with official protection. Sarah laughed, the sound carrying decades of shared experience. Ezra, you designed the systems that revolutionized modern defensive warfare. Your mechanical traps made conventional military doctrine obsolete. If anyone can stop these people without bloodshed, it's you. Besides, Lisa added, examining one of Ezra's modified wheels with professional appreciation, someone needs to test whether these civilian adaptations of Project Labyrinth actually work. Might as well be against people who deserve it. The team spent the next hours transforming Ezra's property into something unprecedented. A defensive system disguised as a traditional craftsman's workshop. Every ancient tool, every weathered beam, every seemingly decorative element could become part of an elaborate mechanical trap network. Beautiful integration, Sarah commented, watching Marcus install pressure-sensitive plates disguised as traditional floorboards. The craftsmanship actually enhances the functionality. No one would ever suspect a Wheelwright's tools could be part of a sophisticated defense system. That's the point, Ezra replied, making minute adjustments to a mechanism hidden within. An antique lathe. Everything here serves multiple purposes, even the wheels themselves. He demonstrated with a partially completed wagon wheel mounted on the wall. With a subtle touch to certain points, the precisely carved spokes shifted, revealing an intricate mechanical system that could transform the innocent-looking craft piece into part of a larger trap network. Brilliant, Lisa breathed, studying the design. You've taken our original concepts from Project Labyrinth and completely reimagined them. These aren't just traps, they're works of art. James looked up from his electronic warfare setup. Speaking of art, you might want to see this. He pulled up intercepted communications on the main screen. They're not waiting 24 hours. Cortez is mobilizing his forces for tonight. Full assault team, heavy weapons. They're not playing games anymore. Good, Ezra said calmly, his weathered hands never pausing in their work. Let them come in force. Let them think they have the advantage. 3 decades of designing military defense systems taught me that overconfident enemies make the best test subjects. As his team continued their preparations, Ezra watched the sun begin to set over the valley. The Cortez Syndicate thought they were dealing with a stubborn old craftsman. By morning, they'd realize their mistake. But by then, it would be far too late. Maria's truck appeared on the security feed, approaching cautiously. Ezra gestured to his team, who quickly disappeared into the cellar. Time to maintain appearances. Ezra, Maria called out, climbing down from her truck. The whole town's talking. They say Cortez's men are gathering at the old Miller place. They've got vehicles, weapons. This isn't just business anymore. Probably not, Ezra agreed, apparently focused on adjusting a wooden spoke. You need to get out of here, Maria insisted. Whatever you're planning, it's not worth your life. Ezra smiled slightly, remembering similar conversations from his days testing experimental defense systems. Maria, trust me. I've spent my entire career preparing for situations exactly like this. The Syndicate thinks they're dealing with a simple Wheelwright. Let them keep thinking that. As Maria drove away, clearly frustrated by his calm demeanor, Sarah emerged from the cellar. She cares about you. She's a good person, Ezra replied. That's why she needs to be far away when this starts. Speaking of which, James, what's our timeline? The electronics expert checked his monitors. Intercepted communications suggest they're moving in 3 hours. Full tactical assault, no more pretense of legitimate business. Perfect. Ezra moved to his workbench, where his latest creation sat partially assembled. To untrained eyes, it looked like an ordinary wagon wheel in progress. To his team, it was the central component of a defensive system that would change everything the Syndicate thought they knew about taking territory by force. "Marcus, how's the perimeter?" Ezra asked, making microscopic adjustments to the wheel's hub mechanism. "Outer layer complete," Marcus replied, wiping grease from his hands. "Pressure plates are disguised as natural ground settlement. Anyone trying to approach from the tree line will trigger the first sequence without even knowing it." Lisa emerged from the workshop's rear section, where she'd been installing specially modified support beams. "Structural integration is ready. The entire building can shift configuration on command. Those support beams they noticed earlier, they're actually part of a much larger mechanical system." "James," Ezra looked to their electronics expert, "communications grid is active. Got eyes on every approach, and our countermeasures are ready. The moment they try to coordinate their attack, they'll find their equipment acting unpredictably." Sarah studied the property layout on the main display. "You've really thought this through, Ezra. The way each element supports the others, it's like a symphony of mechanical engineering." "Had a lot of time to plan," Ezra replied, testing the wheel's hidden mechanisms. "Been watching the valley change, seeing the threats develop. Knew someday someone would try to take it by force. Just didn't expect it to be the Cortez Syndicate." A notification flashed on James's screen. "Movement at the old Miller place. They're gathering their forces. Thermal imaging shows. Impressive numbers. They're not taking any chances." "Show me." Ezra moved to the display. The infrared feed showed dozens of figures moving with military precision, organizing vehicles and equipment. "They're professional, I'll give them that. 3-team approach pattern, heavy weapon support, even brought their own electronic warfare." "Unit, they're expecting resistance," Lisa observed, "but not our kind of resistance." "That's their first mistake," Sarah smiled grimly. "They're preparing for a direct confrontation. All their training, all their experience tells them to expect either armed opposition or no opposition at all. They have no framework for what they're actually walking into." The team watched as the Syndicate forces began their final preparations. Their movements were textbook perfect for a conventional assault. Every position they took, every formation they practiced, played directly into the defensive system's design. "Remember Kosovo?" Marcus asked suddenly. "That classified test site where we first deployed the original labyrinth system? 3 platoons of Special Forces operators," Sarah nodded. "Best of the best, given one simple objective: breach the perimeter. None of them made it past the first layer," Lisa added. "And that was a prototype. This," she gestured to their work, "this is something else entirely." "Sir," James called out, his voice tight with urgency, "new development. Intercepted communications suggest they're bringing in something big, some kind of specialized breaching equipment." Ezra moved to the monitor, studying the grainy thermal images. "Military-grade hydraulic rams, probably stolen from a government facility. They're expecting reinforced doors, hardened walls." "Should we be worried?" Marcus asked. "No," Ezra allowed himself a small smile. "In fact, this is perfect. They're thinking in terms of traditional fortifications. Let them bring their breaching equipment. Let them think they understand what they're dealing with." Sarah caught his meaning, her eyes lighting up with professional appreciation. "The harder they try to breach what they think are our defenses, the more thoroughly they'll trigger the actual defensive systems," Ezra finished. "Every action they take based on their military training will work against them." The sun had nearly set now, painting the valley in deepening shadows. On the monitors, they could see the Syndicate forces beginning their final equipment checks. Cortez himself had arrived, directing operations from a command vehicle. "Time to go dark," Ezra announced. "Everyone knows their positions." The team nodded, each moving to their assigned stations. Despite their ages, despite the years since they'd last worked together, they moved with the coordinated precision of people who had spent their lives pushing the boundaries of defensive warfare. "One last thing," Ezra said as they prepared to separate. "Remember, this isn't about confrontation. It's about control, about showing them that some places, some people, aren't what they appear to be. By morning, the Cortez Syndicate will have learned a valuable lesson about judging things by their surface appearance." As his team took their positions, Ezra returned to his workbench. In the gathering darkness, he made one final adjustment to the wheel's hub mechanism. To any observer, it would appear to be a simple craftsman putting finishing touches on his work. In reality, he was arming what might be the most sophisticated defensive system ever designed. "They're moving," James's voice came through their secure communications. "First elements reaching the outer perimeter in 15 minutes. "Perfect," Ezra replied calmly. "Let them come. Let them bring their weapons, their tactics, their military expertise. Let them think they understand what they're walking into." You see, night was about to become very educational for the Cortez Syndicate. They were about to learn why some old craftsmen are best left in peace and why some workshops contain more than just tools. "Sarah," Ezra called softly. "Final check on the integration systems." Sarah moved through the workshop, her tablet displaying complex mechanical readouts disguised as traditional woodworking blueprints. "Primary response mechanisms are green. The progressive trigger system is particularly elegant, Ezra. The way you've integrated mechanical principles from traditional wheelwright work into modern defensive technology." "Simple physics," Ezra replied, though his eyes showed pride in the work. "Every wheel has its breaking point. Every mechanical system has its vulnerabilities. The trick is using those natural principles to your advantage." Marcus emerged from checking the outer perimeter sensors. "Got something interesting. Their advanced team is using ground-penetrating radar, looking for underground structures, probably." "Let them look." Ezra smiled slightly. "The cellar they might find is just another layer of misdirection. Our real systems are built into the structure itself, hidden in plain sight." Lisa appeared from the workshop's upper level. "Ezra, you might want to see this. Their thermal imaging is picking up our heat signatures, but..." She pulled up a display showing how the workshop's specially designed structure diffused and redirected heat patterns. "They're getting false readings. The building's thermal profile looks exactly like what they'd expect from an old wooden workshop." "Which means," James added from his communication station, "their tactical planning is based on completely wrong assumptions about our positions and capabilities." An alert flashed on the main screen. Thermal imaging showed 3 Syndicate advance teams moving into position, their movements precise and coordinated. They were good, Ezra had to admit. In any normal situation, their approach would be textbook perfect. "They're using a modified pincer movement," Sarah observed, studying the tactical display. 3 teams, coordinated advance, maintaining perfect communications discipline. "Look at their equipment loadout." Marcus pointed to enhanced images. "Military-grade breaching tools, shaped charges, even brought thermal lances. They're prepared for serious resistance." "But not our kind of resistance," Lisa smiled, understanding dawning in her eyes. "Every piece of equipment they're carrying, every tactic they're using, is based on conventional military doctrine," Ezra finished. "Which means every move they make will trigger our systems in exactly the way we want. They're not just walking into our trap. They're actively helping us set it." Sarah completed the thought, professional appreciation in her voice. "Ezra, this goes beyond anything we designed for Project Labyrinth. You've turned their own tactical sophistication into a weapon against them." The team watched as the Syndicate forces continued their careful approach. In the infrared, they could see Cortez in his command vehicle, directing the operation with military precision. Multiple teams maintained perfect spacing, covered every angle, checked for every conventional threat. "Sir," James called out suddenly. "Intercepted communications suggest they're starting electronic warfare measures, trying to jam any security systems they think we might have." "Perfect," Ezra replied. "That means they're also jamming their ability to detect our actual systems. Their own countermeasures are working against them." "Clever," Sarah nodded. "But won't they realize something's wrong when their jamming equipment acts strangely?" By then, Ezra moved to activate the workshop's central defense grid, hidden within seemingly ancient support beams. It'll be too late. Everything they think is a weakness is actually a strength. Every precaution they're taking is leading them exactly where we want them. The sun had fully set now, leaving the valley in darkness. The syndicate forces moved like shadows, their night vision equipment giving them confidence in their tactical advantage. They couldn't know that every piece of advanced technology they carried was about to become part of their undoing. "Final preparations," Ezra announced. "Sarah, you have workshop control. Marcus, outer perimeter is yours. Lisa, structural integrity monitoring. James, keep their communications compromised, but not obviously so. Let them think they're in control, until the moment they realize they never were." As his team moved to their positions, Ezra took one last look at the tactical display. The syndicate forces had established their initial positions exactly as he'd predicted. Their military training, their professional expertise, their sophisticated equipment, all of it was about to be turned against them by systems they couldn't see, couldn't understand, and couldn't fight. "Remember," he said softly to his team, "tonight isn't just about defending this property. It's about showing them why some old crafts, some ancient skills, deserve their respect. By morning, they'll understand that not all weapons look like weapons, and not all craftsmen are what they seem." The first alert sounded, silent, but visible on their monitors. The syndicate's advance team had crossed the outer marker there, careful movements triggering sensors they couldn't detect. The operation was about to begin, and with it, a demonstration of why the world's most sophisticated defensive systems had been inspired by an old Wheelwright's understanding of mechanical principles. "Here we go," Sarah whispered, her hands poised, "over the workshop's control systems. Time to show them what real craftsmanship looks like." The first signs of the syndicate's assault came not with violence, but with silence. The normal night sounds of the Vermont Valley, crickets, owls, the rustle of wind through maple trees, suddenly ceased. Nature itself seemed to hold its breath as Cortez's forces made their initial advance. Through the workshop's sophisticated monitoring systems, Ezra's team watched the operation unfold. 3 tactical teams moved with fluid grace, their night vision equipment giving them confidence in the darkness. Their formation was perfect, their approach professionally executed. They looked like shadows given purpose, each movement calculated and precise. "First team crossing Sector 3, James reported quietly from his communications station. "They're using encrypted short-range radios, military grade. Want me to intercept?" "Not yet," Ezra replied, watching the tactical display. "Let them think their communications are secure, for now." The syndicate's advance team reached the first row of pressure sensors, disguised as natural ground settlement, near ancient maple trees. The soldiers, professional as they were, never noticed how the seemingly random patterns of raised earth and exposed roots formed perfect trigger mechanisms for what was to come. "They're scanning for electronic signatures," Sarah observed, monitoring their equipment readings, "looking for standard security systems." "Let them scan." Ezra's weathered hands moved across his workbench, activating mechanical systems that had nothing to do with electronics. "They won't find what they're not looking for." The first indication that something was wrong came when the syndicate's point man tried to establish a surveillance position near an old maple tree. The ground beneath him shifted slightly, not enough to cause alarm, but enough to trigger the first of Ezra's mechanisms. Ancient wooden wheels, mounted as decorative elements around the property, began to turn imperceptibly. Mechanical sequence initiated, Lisa reported, watching stress indicators on her display. Primary response grid is active. The syndicate forces continued their advance, unaware that every step they took was being guided by carefully designed terrain features. What looked like natural erosion patterns were actually sophisticated channeling systems, herding them into precisely calculated positions. Second team is deploying electronic countermeasures, James announced. They're trying to jam any security systems in the area. Perfect, Sarah smiled grimly. Their jamming frequencies are actually powering our mechanical trigger mechanisms. The harder they try to disable what they think are our defenses, the more they're activating our actual systems, Ezra finished. Basic principles of energy transfer, just applied creatively. On their monitors, they watched as the Syndicate's breaching team approached the workshop's main entrance. Their thermal imaging showed them exactly what they expected to see. Heat signatures consistent with an old wooden building. They had no way of knowing that the structure's actual thermal profile was being redirected and diffused through systems hidden in plain sight. Breaching team in position, Marcus reported. They're setting up their hydraulic ram, military grade. Equipment probably stolen from a government facility. Sir, James cut in, intercepted communications suggest they're about to begin their main assault. Cortez is coordinating 3 simultaneous breach points. Ezra nodded, his calm demeanor masking the intense calculation behind his eyes. Time. To show them why some old crafts survive for centuries, he moved to the central control station, disguised as an antique wheel-turning mechanism. Sarah, initiate sequence 1. The first true demonstration of the workshop's defenses began subtly. As the breaching team prepared their equipment, they failed to notice how the ground beneath their feet had begun to shift, not suddenly but gradually. A millimeter here, a slight angle change there. The seemingly solid earth was actually a sophisticated mechanical system, designed by someone who understood that the most effective traps are the ones you don't recognize until it's too late. They're starting their breach, Lisa reported, watching through their surveillance system. The hydraulic ram, a piece of equipment capable of breaking through reinforced concrete, powered up with a low hum. Now, Ezra commanded softly. The moment. The ram made contact with the workshop's door. A cascade of mechanical reactions began. The door, rather than resisting the force, absorbed and redirected it through a complex series of hidden wheels and gears. The energy from the breach attempt traveled through the building's structure, triggering mechanisms that had waited years for this moment. Beautiful, Sarah breathed, watching the energy transfer readings on her display. The entire building is responding like a single integrated machine. The Syndicate's breaching team didn't immediately realize anything was wrong. Their equipment was functioning normally. The door was beginning to give way. Everything seemed to be proceeding according to plan. But with each pulse of the hydraulic ram, more of Ezra's systems activated, turning the workshop itself into an elaborate mechanical trap. Sir, James called out, they're starting their secondary breach attempts. Teams 2 and 3 are in position. Let them try, Ezra replied, his fingers dancing across controls disguised as traditional woodworking tools. Every point they attack becomes another part of our defense. The Syndicate forces, professional and well-equipped as they were, had made a crucial mistake. They assumed they were dealing with static defenses, walls to be breached, doors to be broken, security systems to be disabled. Instead, they were fighting against something far more sophisticated, a defensive system that used their own actions. Against them, energy readings are optimal, Lisa reported, monitoring the structural integrity of the workshop. The building is absorbing and redirecting force exactly as designed. The first real indication that something was wrong came when the breaching team's leader noticed their hydraulic ram wasn't performing as expected. The door was yielding, yes, but not in any way they'd seen before. Instead of breaking or buckling, it seemed to be adapting. "They're realizing something's off," Marcus observed. "Look at their body language. Training tells them to expect certain reactions to their breach attempt. They're not getting them. Time for phase 2, Ezra announced. Sarah, activate the wheel networks. Around the property, seemingly decorative wagon wheels began to turn. Each rotation triggered another sequence of mechanical reactions, transforming the very ground the syndicate forces stood on. What had appeared to be solid earth became unstable, not obviously or catastrophically, but in subtle ways that made tactical movement increasingly difficult. "Cortez is calling for a status report," James reported, monitoring their communications. "Their breaching teams are having trouble maintaining position." Through their surveillance system, they watched as the syndicate forces struggled to adapt to terrain that seemed to be working against them. Every standard tactical approach they attempted was met with subtle but effective mechanical counters. "They're switching to their backup plan," Sarah noted, "bringing up shaped charges. They think the problem is with their hydraulic equipment." "Let them," Ezra replied calmly. "The more force they use, the more energy we have to work with," Lisa finished, understanding dawning in her eyes. "You've turned the entire property into one massive energy absorption and redistribution system." The night was still young, and the syndicate forces were about to learn why some old crafts, some ancient principles of mechanics, had survived into the modern age. They had brought modern military technology to what they thought would be an easy conquest. Instead, they were about to face something their training had never prepared them for. A defense system designed by someone who understood that the most powerful forces are often the ones you never see coming. "Movement at the east perimeter," Marcus called out suddenly. "They're bringing up specialized equipment, thermal lances, high-powered cutting tools." "Interesting choice," Sarah commented, watching the tactical display. "They think our defenses are based on material strength." Ezra's hands moved across his control panel, adjusting the workshop's integrated mechanisms. "They're about to learn that strength isn't always about resistance." The syndicate's technical team began setting up their cutting equipment, confident that even reinforced materials would yield to the intense heat of their thermal lances. What they couldn't know was that the workshop's walls contained a network of specially designed channels hidden within seemingly solid wooden beams. "Thermal lance active," Lisa reported, monitoring structural sensors. "Temperature rising rapidly at point of contact." "Now," Ezra commanded quietly. The moment the thermal lance touched the workshop's outer wall, a sophisticated heat distribution system activated. Channels within the wood, designed using principles that Ezra had perfected over decades, began redirecting the thermal energy. The heat, instead of burning through, was channeled through the building's structure in carefully controlled patterns. Incredible. Sarah breathed, watching the thermal imaging display. "You've turned the entire workshop into a heat sink. The more energy they put in, the more we can use," Ezra confirmed. "Every attack feeds our defenses." The syndicate's technical team frowned in confusion as their thermal lance, capable of cutting through steel, seemed to have minimal effect on what appeared to be an ordinary wooden structure. Their confusion turned to concern as they noticed their equipment was beginning to overheat, the redirected energy affecting their own tools. "Sir," James interrupted, "intercepted communications indicate they're calling in their heavy weapons team. They're escalating to explosives." "Predictable," Ezra nodded. "When subtlety fails, they resort to brute force. Sarah, prepare the resonance circuits." "Resonance circuits?" Lisa asked, looking up from her structural monitoring station. "You've integrated harmonic response systems into a wooden building?" "Everything has a natural frequency," Ezra explained, making minute adjustments. To hidden mechanisms. Every material, every structure responds to certain vibrations. Most engineers try to dampen these responses. I've learned to use them. The syndicate's demolition team moved into position, setting shaped charges at what they believed were structural weak points. Their placement was technically perfect, demonstrating years of tactical experience, but they were playing directly into Ezra's hands. Charges set, Marcus reported. They're clearing the blast radius. Detonation in 30 seconds. Watch closely, Ezra told his team. You're about to see why the principles of wheel-making can be applied to modern defense systems. The explosions, when they came, were precisely controlled and professionally executed. The syndicate forces waited for the smoke to clear, expecting to see breached walls and compromised structures. Instead, they witnessed something unprecedented. The workshop seemed to absorb the explosive force, its specially designed structure channeling and redirecting the energy through networks of wheels and gears hidden within its walls. The blasts, rather than destroying the building, actually powered its defensive mechanisms. Energy conversion successful, Lisa announced, watching in amazement as her instruments registered the workshop's response. The blast force is being redistributed through the mechanical networks. Around the property, previously dormant systems began activating, powered by the converted explosive energy. Wooden wheels turned, gears engaged, and the very ground began to shift in subtle but significant ways. They're falling back, James reported. Thermal imaging shows confusion in their ranks. This isn't following any tactical scenario they're trained for. Through their surveillance system, they watched as the syndicate forces struggled to maintain their positions. The ground beneath their feet had become treacherous, not obviously unstable, but subtly altered by mechanical systems that drew their power from the very attacks meant to destroy them. Cortez is demanding answers, James continued, monitoring their communications. Their team leaders can't explain why none of their breaching methods are working, because they're looking for the wrong things, Sarah observed. They expect electronic security systems, reinforced barriers, and conventional defenses. Instead, they're fighting against basic principles of physics and mechanics that have been refined over centuries. Sir, Marcus cut in, they're changing tactics. Looks like they're preparing for a coordinated multi-point assault, bringing up all their remaining equipment. Ezra smiled slightly, his weathered hands moving to a different set of controls. Good. Time to show them what a Wheelwright's workshop can really do when properly motivated. The night had reached a crucial turning point. The syndicate forces, professional and well-equipped as they were, found themselves facing something outside their experience. Their military training, their advanced technology, their tactical expertise, none of it had prepared them for a defense system that turned their own actions against them through principles as old as civilization itself. Energy levels are optimal, Lisa reported. All mechanical systems are primed and ready. James, prepare to initiate our own communications protocol, Ezra commanded. It's time to explain to our visitors exactly what kind of situation they've walked into. The workshop's hidden mechanisms hummed with potential energy, ready to demonstrate why some old crafts had survived into the modern age, not because they were outdated, but because they understood fundamental truths about how the physical world worked. The syndicate was about to learn that sometimes the most effective weapons aren't weapons at all, but tools in the hands of someone who truly understands their principles. Initiate broadcast, Ezra commanded. James activated their communication system, carefully designed to cut through the syndicate's jamming attempts while appearing to be simple interference. Cortez, Ezra's voice carried across all their frequencies, calm and measured. I believe it's time we had a proper discussion about the nature of force and resistance. Through their monitors, they watched the syndicate leader's reaction. Cortez, stood by his command vehicle, frustration evident in his stance as his elite forces failed to breach what appeared to be a simple wooden workshop. "What kind of games are you playing, old man?" Cortez's reply crackled through their speakers. "No games," Ezra responded, his hands moving across controls disguised as woodworking tools. "Just a practical demonstration of mechanical principles that your modern military training seems to have forgotten." As if to emphasize his point, one of the syndicate's thermal lances suddenly sparked and died, its power redirected through hidden channels to activate another series of defensive mechanisms. Around the property, more of the seemingly decorative wheels began to turn. "Sir," Lisa called out, "they're trying to establish a new breach point at the north wall, bringing up their remaining shaped charges." "Interesting choice," Ezra noted. "Sarah, prepare the harmonic response grid in that sector." The demolition team worked quickly, placing their charges with professional precision. They had adjusted their technique, using a more sophisticated placement pattern to counter what they assumed were reinforced walls. "Charges set," Marcus reported. "Detonation in 15 seconds. "Watch this," Sarah told the team, her eyes on the monitoring displays. Ezra integrated the harmonic response systems into the actual structure of the building. The principles he used in wheel design applied to architectural defense. The explosions came in a carefully timed sequence, designed to overcome any conventional structural reinforcement. But the workshop's response was anything but conventional. The blast. Waves, instead of tearing through walls, were caught in a complex network of mechanical channels and resonance chambers. "Energy capture was successful," Lisa announced, monitoring the readings. "Converting explosive force to mechanical power now." The syndicate forces watched in disbelief as their carefully planned detonation seemed to be absorbed by the building. More than that, the explosive energy was being redirected, powering mechanical systems they couldn't see but could definitely feel as the ground beneath their feet began to shift in increasingly unnatural ways. "Cortez is demanding explanations," James reported, monitoring their communications. His demolition expert is trying to explain why military-grade explosives aren't having the expected effect on a wooden building. "Because they fundamentally misunderstand what they're dealing with," Ezra explained, making subtle adjustments to his control systems. "They think this is about the strength of materials, about modern technology versus old wood. They don't realize this entire workshop is one interconnected mechanical system designed to use their own force against them." Through their surveillance network, they watched as the syndicate forces struggled to maintain their positions. The ground, subtly altered by mechanical systems powered by their own explosive attempts, had become increasingly treacherous. Every step they took triggered new responses, not obviously or catastrophically, but in ways that made coordinated military movement nearly impossible. "They're falling back," Marcus observed, regrouping around their command vehicle. "Thermal imaging shows they're breaking out their reserve equipment." "Sir," James cut in urgently, "intercepted communications suggest they're preparing something big. They're calling it Protocol Avalanche, some kind of sustained assault program." Ezra's expression remained calm, but his eyes showed intense calculation. "They're about to commit fully, to throw everything they have at us, thinking that enough force will eventually overcome any defense." He turned to his team. "Time to show them why that assumption is dangerously wrong." "All systems primed," Sarah confirmed, her hands moving across her control station. "The mechanical networks are fully charged from their previous attempts." "Lisa, status of the structural integrity?" "Building is operating at optimal levels," she replied. "Every attack has actually improved our response capabilities. The energy conversion systems are running at peak efficiency." "Marcus, perimeter sensors show they're moving their remaining forces into position. Whatever this protocol avalanche is, it's big." Ezra nodded, making final adjustments to his systems. They're about to learn the true purpose of a wheel. It's not just about turning or carrying loads. His weathered hands moved with surgical precision across the controls. It's about converting and redirecting force, about using the most basic principles of physics to overcome seemingly superior power. Through their monitors, they watched as the syndicate forces prepared for what they clearly intended to be their final assault. They had brought up everything: thermal lances, shaped charges, hydraulic rams, even what appeared to be military-grade sonic disruptors. They really don't understand what they're dealing with, do they? Sarah observed, watching the tactical display. No, Ezra replied quietly. They think this is a battle of technology versus tradition, of modern military might against old-world craftsmanship. His fingers traced the edge of an antique wheel mounted on his control panel. They're about to learn why some principles, some understandings, have survived for centuries, not because they're outdated, but because they're fundamentally true. Protocol Avalanche began with a symphony of destruction. Multiple explosive charges detonated simultaneously around the workshop's perimeter, while sonic disruptors targeted the building's structural points. Thermal lances blazed against walls, and hydraulic rams struck at every potential weakness. The syndicate forces had committed fully to overwhelming force, confident that no structure could withstand such a concentrated assault. Energy readings are off the scale, Lisa reported, watching her instruments with professional fascination. They're putting out enough force to level a reinforced bunker. Perfect, Ezra replied calmly, his hands dancing across controls disguised as woodworking. Tools. Sarah, initiate the primary conversion sequence. The workshop's response to this massive assault was unprecedented. Instead of resisting the forces being applied, the building's integrated mechanical systems began capturing and redirecting energy in ways that defied conventional military understanding. Every explosion, every impact, every burst of sonic force was channeled through networks of wheels and gears, transformed from destructive power into useful mechanical energy. Magnificent, Sarah breathed, watching the energy flow patterns on her display. The whole building is acting like one giant mechanical transformer. Every attack is just feeding our systems more power. The syndicate forces committed to their assault didn't immediately realize that their massive show of force was actually strengthening their opponent's position. Their thermal lances, designed to cut through reinforced steel, found their energy being drawn away through hidden channels. Sonic disruptors encountered resonance patterns that turned their own frequencies back on them. "Sir," James called out, urgently, "intercepted communications show they're bringing up something new, some kind of experimental breaching technology." Through their surveillance system, they watched as the syndicate teams wheeled out what looked like a modernized battering ram, but with sophisticated hydraulic systems and computerized targeting. "Military prototype," Marcus identified, studying the equipment. "Supposedly still in development. They must have stolen it from a research facility." "Doesn't matter," Ezra replied, making subtle adjustments to his control systems. "The principles remain the same. Force is force, whether it comes from black powder or hydraulic pressure." The prototype breaching system powered up with a deep hum that resonated through the ground. Its targeting computers calculated optimal strike points, analyzing the workshop's structure for vulnerabilities. The syndicate forces, confident in their superior technology, prepared for what they believed would be the decisive blow. "They're targeting the main support points," Lisa warned, monitoring structural sensors. "This thing hits harder than anything they've used so far." "Let them try," Ezra's voice carried absolute certainty. "Sometimes the best way to handle superior force is to simply redirect it." The prototype struck with devastating power, its computerized systems delivering precisely calculated impacts, designed to shatter any conventional structure. but the workshop's response was anything but conventional. The force of each impact traveled through hidden mechanical pathways, transformed by systems of wheels and gears that dated back to ancient principles of physics. Energy captured at 100%, Sarah reported with growing excitement. The conversion networks are operating beyond projected capacity. Ezra, what you've done with the mechanical multiplication principles. Basic wheelwright knowledge, he replied, modestly. Understanding how force moves through circular systems, how to transfer and amplify power using simple machines. The principles haven't changed since the first wheel was created. The Syndicate's advanced breaching system continued its assault, its computerized brain unable to comprehend why its attacks weren't having the expected effect. Instead of breaking through walls, each impact was being absorbed, redirected, and repurposed by mechanical systems that had waited years for exactly this kind of challenge. Cortez is demanding explanations, James announced, monitoring their communications. Their technical team can't understand why their most advanced technology is being defeated by what appears to be an old wooden building. Because they're thinking like modern soldiers, Ezra explained, his hands moving with surgical precision across his controls. They believe in overwhelming force, in superior technology. They've forgotten that some of the most powerful principles in physics were discovered by craftsmen working with wood and metal centuries ago. The prototype breaching system's hydraulics whined as it powered up for another assault. But this time, Ezra was done simply absorbing their attacks. Time to show them what we can do with all that energy they've given us, he announced. Sarah, prepare the mechanical response grid. Marcus, status of the ground modification systems? All primed and ready, Marcus replied. The energy from their attacks has charged every mechanical network on the property. Lisa, structural integrity. Building is operating at optimal levels, she confirmed. The energy conversion systems are actually running more efficiently than our theoretical models predicted. Perfect. Ezra's fingers found specific control points on his workbench, each disguised as a traditional woodworking tool. Let's teach them why some old crafts survive into the modern age. The workshop's response began subtly. Around the property, the seemingly decorative wheels that had absorbed so much energy began to turn, their movement triggering cascading sequences of mechanical reactions. The ground beneath the Syndicate forces, already destabilized by their own attacks, began to shift in increasingly dramatic ways. "What the hell?" one of the Syndicate operators shouted, his voice caught by their surveillance systems as the prototype breaching system began to sink into ground that had suddenly become unstable. "Mechanical transformation network active," Sarah reported, watching the systems respond. "The ground modification grid is operating at full capacity." Through their monitors, they watched as the Syndicate forces struggled to maintain their positions. The terrain itself seemed to be working against them, transforming from solid ground into an ever-shifting landscape that defied tactical movement patterns. "Their advanced equipment is actually making things worse for them," Marcus observed. "The weight of their prototype breacher, combined with our mechanical soil manipulation systems, is turning their own technology against them," Ezra finished. "The heavier their equipment, the more it works in our favor." The prototype breaching systems operators fought to maintain control as their sophisticated machine began tilting at impossible angles. The computerized targeting systems, unable to compensate for terrain that refused to behave according to normal physics, started displaying error messages. "Sir," James called out, "Cortez is ordering his forces to abandon the heavy equipment. They're switching to lighter tactical teams." "Predictable," Ezra nodded. "When technology fails, they fall back on training. Sarah, initiate the secondary response grid." The Syndicate's tactical teams moved with professional precision, adapting their approach to account for the unstable terrain. They split into smaller units, using light equipment and maintaining minimal ground contact. It was a textbook adaptation to difficult conditions. "They're good," Lisa commented, watching their movement patterns. "Former special forces, definitely. Look at how they're distributing their weight, testing each step." "Not good enough," Ezra replied, activating new systems. "They're still thinking in terms of conventional physics. Show them why that's a mistake." The workshop's next demonstration of power was more direct. The mechanical energy harvested from the Syndicate's earlier attacks was released through carefully designed channels, creating waves of kinetic force that rippled through the ground in precise patterns. "Kinetic redirection grid online," Sarah announced, "converting stored energy to directed force now." The tactical teams, despite their training and experience, found themselves facing terrain that didn't just shift unpredictably, it actively responded to their movements. Every step they took triggered mechanical reactions that seemed to defy the laws of physics. "Cortez is losing control of his operation," James reported, monitoring their communications. "His team leaders are reporting impossible situations. Equipment malfunctions, terrain anomalies, because they're trying to understand what's happening using modern military doctrine," Ezra explained, his hands moving across controls with practiced precision. "They can't accept that they're being defeated by principles of mechanics that have existed for centuries." Through their surveillance system, they watched as the Syndicate's carefully planned assault dissolved into chaos. Tactical teams lost. Formation as the ground beneath them transformed. Advanced equipment, rendered useless by mechanical countermeasures, had to be abandoned. "They're falling back to their command vehicle," Marcus observed, regrouping for movement at the perimeter. "They're bringing in something new." "Aerial surveillance shows multiple vehicles approaching," Lisa added. "Heavy transport trucks. They're calling in reinforcements." Ezra studied the tactical display, his expression thoughtful. "They're not reinforcements. Look at the vehicle configurations. Those are specialized equipment transports." "Sir," James interrupted, "intercepted communications confirm it. They're bringing in some kind of classified military hardware. Cortez is calling it Project Thunderbolt." The team watched as large transport vehicles approached the property, their contents hidden under secure coverings. Whatever the Syndicate was bringing to bear, it represented a significant escalation in their assault. "Multiple new energy signatures detected," Lisa reported. "Whatever they're unloading, it's putting out massive power readings." "Good," Ezra replied calmly, his weathered hands moving to a different set of controls. "Let them bring their most advanced technology. The principles we're using here were old when the first wheel was invented. Some truths don't become obsolete just because science marches on." Sarah studied the incoming data with growing concern. "Ezra, these power readings, they're like nothing I've seen before. Whatever Project Thunderbolt is, it's beyond cutting edge." "Doesn't matter," he responded, activating new sequences in his mechanical defense grid. "Force is force. Energy is energy. The laws of physics don't change just because the equipment gets more sophisticated." The night had reached a crucial turning point. The Syndicate, frustrated by their inability to overcome what appeared to be simple mechanical defenses, was about to deploy technology that pushed the boundaries of modern military science. But they still hadn't grasped the fundamental truth they were facing. Sometimes the oldest principles are the most powerful, and sometimes the simplest machines can overcome the most advanced technology. The transport vehicle's cargo covers were removed, revealing equipment that seemed to belong in a science fiction movie rather than a Vermont valley. Sleek, angular machines hummed with barely contained energy, their surfaces covered in complex electromagnetic arrays. "Project Thunderbolt confirmed," James reported, his voice tense. "Intercepted data suggests it's some kind of quantum resonance technology. designed to disrupt the molecular structure of materials. They're deploying in a triangular formation, Marcus observed, 3 units, creating an energy field that encompasses the entire workshop. Ezra studied the machines through their surveillance system, his experienced eyes noting details others might miss. Look at the power distribution nodes. The basic principle is still mechanical. They're just using quantum fields instead of physical force. "Sir," Lisa called out urgently, "these readings are unprecedented. The energy output is beyond anything our sensors were designed to measure." The Project Thunderbolt units powered up simultaneously, creating a visible distortion in the air between them. The ground began to vibrate at a molecular level as quantum fields interfered with the basic structure of matter itself. "Structural integrity holding," Sarah reported, though her voice carried concern. "But these vibrations, they're affecting everything down to the molecular level." "Perfect," Ezra replied, his calm demeanor unchanged. "They've just given us exactly what we need." His team looked at him in surprise as he moved to an ancient-looking workbench that dominated one corner of their control center. With practiced precision, he began adjusting what appeared to be traditional woodworking tools. "Ezra," Sarah began, "this is quantum technology. It operates on principles that weren't even theorized when we built these defenses." "True," he acknowledged, his weathered hands moving with surgical precision. "But what they're doing, at its core, is creating vibration, resonance, the same principles wheelwrights have understood for centuries, just at a different scale." The Project Thunderbolt units reached full power, their quantum fields creating visible distortions in reality itself. The syndicate forces watched with confidence as the air around the workshop began to shimmer and twist. "Building molecular structure is becoming unstable," Lisa warned, watching her instruments. "The quantum fields are affecting everything they touch." "Not everything," Ezra corrected, making final adjustments to his controls. "Watch this. Sarah, activate the harmonic response network. All frequencies." What happened next defied the syndicate's understanding of modern physics. The workshop's ancient wooden structure, rather than dissolving under the quantum assault, began to resonate in perfect harmony with the energy being directed at it. The quantum fields, designed to disrupt matter at its most basic level, encountered something they weren't programmed to handle: perfectly calibrated mechanical resonance. "Energy patterns are shifting," Sarah reported with growing excitement. "The quantum fields, they're being channeled through our mechanical systems." "Impossible," one of the Project Thunderbolt technicians could be heard saying over their surveillance. "System. Quantum resonance should be breaking down all mechanical cohesion." "They still don't understand," Ezra said softly, watching the energy patterns flow through his workshop's hidden networks. "The principles of resonance, of harmonic motion, they're universal. Whether you're dealing with a wooden wheel or a quantum field, the basic laws remain the same." The Project Thunderbolt units began to show signs of strain as their own energy was captured and redirected through systems they couldn't detect. The quantum fields, instead of destroying the workshop, were being used to power its defenses. "Sir," James called out, "Cortez is receiving warnings from his technical team. The quantum resonance is becoming unstable. They're losing control of the fields." Through their monitors, they watched as the syndicate's most advanced technology began to work against itself. The quantum fields, carefully channeled through Ezra's mechanical systems, created feedback loops that the Project Thunderbolt units weren't designed to handle. "Should we be concerned about quantum instability?" Marcus asked, watching the energy. "Readings climbed to unprecedented levels." "No," Ezra replied confidently, "because we're not fighting against quantum fields. We're working with them, using principles of mechanical resonance that date back to the first wheel. Sometimes the oldest knowledge is the most powerful." The night air crackled with energy as ancient craftsmanship met cutting-edge technology in a battle that would redefine what was possible. The Syndicate had brought their most advanced weapons to bear, never realizing that they were about to be defeated not by superior force, but by superior understanding of how the physical world truly worked. The quantum fields surrounding the workshop pulsed with unstable energy, as Project Thunderbolt's sophisticated technology fought against principles of mechanics that predated modern civilization. Cortez watched from his command vehicle, his confidence wavering as he witnessed the impossible, his most advanced weapons being systematically neutralized by what appeared to be simple wooden machinery. "Status report," he demanded over there. "IGCOM system," his voice caught by James's monitoring equipment. "Sir, the quantum resonance fields are destabilizing," one of the Project Thunderbolt technicians responded. "The target structure isn't breaking down. It's somehow adapting to the fields." "That's not possible," Cortez snapped. "These systems are designed to disrupt matter at the molecular level. Nothing can resist quantum destabilization. Nothing." "Modern," Ezra's voice cut through their communications, calm and measured. "But you're not fighting against modern technology, Mr. Cortez. You're fighting against principles that were old when the first wheel was carved from wood." Inside the workshop's control center, Ezra's team watched as their mechanical systems transformed the Syndicate's quantum assault into usable energy. Every wheel, every gear, every carefully designed component worked in perfect harmony to channel forces that should have torn the building apart. "Energy conversion at 200% of projected capacity," Lisa reported, her instruments tracking the flow of power through their networks. "The quantum fields are actually enhancing our mechanical systems." "Of course they are," Sarah nodded, understanding dawning in her eyes. "Quantum resonance is amplifying the natural harmonics of our mechanical components. Ezra, you designed this place to work with any form of energy, didn't you? The principles don't change," he replied, his weathered hands moving across controls disguised as traditional woodworking tools. "Whether it's the force of a simple lever or a quantum field, it's all about understanding how energy moves and transforms." The Project Thunderbolt units began to show signs of severe strain. Their sleek casings cracked as internal components fought against feedback loops they were never designed to handle. The quantum fields, rather than destroying their target, were being woven into the workshop's defensive matrix. "Sir," Marcus called out urgently, "thermal imaging shows critical heat buildup in their quantum generators. They're approaching catastrophic." "Failure. Cortez knows it too," James added, monitoring their communications. "His technical team is warning him about cascade failure risks." Through their surveillance system, they watched as the Syndicate leader faced a crucial decision. His most sophisticated weapons had not only failed to breach the workshop's defenses, but were now in danger of self-destructing. "Shut it down," Cortez finally ordered, his voice tight with controlled fury. "Power down Project Thunderbolt before we lose the units completely." As the quantum fields flickered and died, the workshop's mechanical systems hummed with absorbed energy. Every failed attack had only served to strengthen its defenses, charging networks of wheels and gears with power that could now be used against their attackers. "They're pulling back," Lisa observed, watching the tactical display. "Regrouping around their command vehicles. But wait, something's different. These energy signatures..." "They're not retreating," Ezra confirmed, studying the patterns of movement. "They're preparing for something else. Something they think we won't be able to counter with mechanical systems." As if to confirm his assessment, new vehicles appeared at the perimeter of their surveillance range. These were different from the previous transports, heavily shielded, with distinctive radiation warnings on their sides. "Sir," James's voice carried clear concern. "Intercepted communications mention something called Project Eclipse. The security encryption on these transmissions..." It's beyond anything I've seen. Radiation signatures detected, Lisa reported, her instruments picking up new threats. Whatever they're bringing in, it's putting out exotic particle emissions. This is bleeding-edge physics. Ezra studied the incoming data, his expression thoughtful. The syndicate was escalating beyond conventional weapons, beyond even quantum technology. They were about to deploy something that pushed the boundaries of known science. They think they've figured it out, Sarah observed, watching the new equipment being positioned. They believe our mechanical systems can't possibly defend against exotic particle physics. An understandable assumption, Ezra replied, moving to a different section of his control panel, but fundamentally flawed, because they still haven't grasped what they're really fighting against. The new devices began powering up, creating distortions in space-time itself that their instruments could barely measure. The air crackled with exotic energies as Project Eclipse prepared to unleash forces that shouldn't exist outside of theoretical physics laboratories. "Ezra," Lisa called out, her voice tense, "these readings, they're suggesting temporal distortion effects. They're not just trying to destroy the workshop, they're trying to alter its fundamental relationship with time and space." "Ambitious," he commented, his weathered hands moving with practiced precision across controls that looked like ancient woodworking tools. "But they've made a crucial mistake." "What mistake?" Marcus asked, watching as reality itself seemed to warp around. "The Project Eclipse devices. They assume that because something is old, it's bound by modern understanding of physics," Ezra explained, activating systems that had waited decades for this moment. "They don't realize that some principles transcend our current scientific models. The knowledge encoded in ancient crafts sometimes runs deeper than we imagine." As Project Eclipse reached full power, the workshop's response would demonstrate why some old crafts had survived, not because they were simple, but because they understood truths about the physical world that modern science was only beginning to rediscover. The first wave of temporal distortion rippled across the property, bending light and warping spatial relationships. Normal matter began to shift and flow as fundamental constants of physics were locally altered. "Incredible," Sarah breathed, watching her instruments struggle to measure what was happening. "They're creating localized bubbles of altered space-time. The theoretical implications alone—" "Focus," Ezra commanded calmly. "Lisa, what are the structural sensors telling us?" "The workshop's outer layer is experiencing temporal drift," she reported, studying complex readouts. "Different sections of the building are literally experiencing time at different rates." Through their surveillance system, they watched as Project Eclipse's effects intensified. The syndicate forces, confident in their most advanced technology, waited for the workshop to tear itself apart as conflicting time streams created impossible stresses. "Sir," James called out urgently, "intercepted communications suggest this is just the first phase. They're preparing to introduce something called quantum vacuum collapse into the temporal distortion field." "Now that would be genuinely dangerous," Ezra acknowledged, his hands moving to a section of his control panel that looked particularly ancient. "If we let them do it." Sarah initialized the temporal harmony grid. "The what?" Marcus asked, but Sarah was already moving, her eyes wide with sudden understanding. "Of course," she whispered, "the wheel patterns throughout the property. They're not just mechanical systems. They're mathematical expressions of cyclical time, encoded in physical form." The workshop's response to Project Eclipse began subtly. The seemingly decorative wheels mounted throughout the property started turning at precisely calculated rates, each movement expressing complex mathematical relationships that had been understood by master craftsmen centuries before modern physics gave them names. "Energy patterns are shifting," Lisa reported with growing excitement. "The temporal distortions, they're being channeled into our mechanical systems, but not just as power. They're becoming part of the defensive matrix itself, the project. Eclipse operators frowned at their instruments as their temporal assault failed to produce the expected catastrophic effects. Instead, the workshop seemed to be achieving impossible stability, maintaining its integrity even as space-time warped around it. "How is this possible?" one of the technicians demanded over their comms. "We're literally altering the flow of time. Nothing mechanical should be able to function under these conditions." "That's where you're wrong," Ezra's voice cut through. "They're frequencies. The principles I work with don't just predate your technology. They predate your understanding of physics itself. The wheel isn't just a machine. It's an expression of fundamental truths about how reality works." As if to demonstrate his point, the workshop's defensive systems began to actively engage with the temporal distortions. The carefully designed network of wheels and gears wasn't just resisting the effects of Project Eclipse, it was using them, incorporating them into patterns of motion that seemed to defy modern physics. "Ezra," Lisa called out, her voice filled with wonder. "The temporal fields, they're synchronizing with our mechanical rhythms. The workshop isn't just surviving the distortions, it's stabilizing them." "Of course it is," he replied, making minute adjustments to his controls. "Because everything they're doing, every sophisticated piece of technology they're using, is still bound by the same basic principles that govern all motion, all energy, all change, principles that wheelwrights have understood for millennia." The Project Eclipse operators watched in disbelief as their temporal assault was not only contained, but redirected. The sophisticated equipment, designed to tear apart the fabric of reality itself, found its effects being woven into patterns of motion that dated back to the dawn of human craftsmanship. "Sir," Marcus reported, monitoring the tactical situation, "they're bringing the quantum vacuum generators online. Whatever they're planning will fail," Ezra finished confidently, "because they're still thinking like modern soldiers, relying on technology they don't fully understand. They haven't realized that some knowledge doesn't become obsolete just because science marches on." The air itself seemed to vibrate as Project Eclipse reached its full potential. Reality buckled and twisted as temporal distortions combined with quantum effects in ways that shouldn't have been possible. The syndicate forces waited for their ultimate weapon to finally overcome what they still thought was just an old, wooden workshop. Instead, they witnessed something unprecedented. The workshop's mechanical systems, driven by principles older than written history, began to impose order on the chaos they had created. Every wheel, every gear, every carefully crafted component moved in patterns that transformed temporal distortion into stable, useful energy. "Beautiful," Sarah whispered, watching the energy flow on her display. "The mathematics of it, it's like discovering that ancient craftsmen understood string theory through pure intuition and experience." "Not string theory," Ezra corrected, his weathered hands still moving with precise purpose across his controls. "Something old, something more fundamental. The kind of knowledge that gets encoded in crafts and passed down through generations because it works, even if the scientific explanation comes millennia later." Project Eclipse's operators fought to maintain control of their systems as reality itself seemed to rebel against their attempts to weaponize it. The quantum vacuum generators whined in protest as their effects were caught and channeled through mechanical systems that shouldn't have been able to exist in warped space-time. "Critical containment failure imminent," one of the technicians shouted over their comms. "The temporal fields are collapsing, but not in any way we've seen before. It's like they're being woven into something else." "Impossible," Cortez's voice cut through the chaos. "Nothing can manipulate temporal effects like that. Physics doesn't allow for it." "Your physics doesn't," Ezra replied calmly through their frequencies. But the principles I work with were discovered through millennia of practical experience. Sometimes the oldest knowledge is the deepest. The workshop's response to Project Eclipse reached its culmination. Every wheel, every gear, every carefully crafted component moved in perfect synchronization, creating patterns of motion that transformed temporal chaos into ordered energy. The sophisticated equipment brought by the syndicate found itself not just defeated, but incorporated into a deeper understanding of how reality worked. "Sir," Lisa called out urgently, detecting massive energy build-up in their quantum vacuum generators. The feedback loops we're creating, they can't handle it. "They need to power down," Sarah added, watching critical readings spike across her displays. Their equipment wasn't designed to handle stable temporal mechanics. Through their surveillance system, they watched as Project Eclipse began to turn against its operators. The sophisticated devices, unable to cope with the ordered patterns being imposed on their chaos, started to overload. "Shut it down," Cortez ordered, but it was too late. The quantum vacuum generators, caught in feedback loops they couldn't break, reached critical instability. "Everyone brace," Ezra commanded, his hands moving to a final set of controls. "Sarah, activate the containment grid. Time to show them the true purpose of all these wheels." The workshop's defensive systems, charged with energy from hours of absorbing attacks, engaged their final configuration. As Project Eclipse's equipment began to fail catastrophically, the ancient principles encoded in Ezra's machines demonstrated their ultimate purpose. Instead of allowing the temporal energies to explode outward, the network of wheels and gears caught the collapse, channeling it through paths that had waited decades for this moment. The potentially devastating release of quantum forces was transformed into a controlled demonstration of mechanical mastery over energy itself. "Containment holding," Lisa reported with amazement. "The temporal feedback is being processed through our systems." "Ezra, this is beyond anything we designed for Project Labyrinth, because this isn't military technology," he replied, making final adjustments as reality stabilized around them. "This is craft knowledge, passed down through generations of people who understood that the deepest truths often hide in the simplest forms." The syndicate forces watched in disbelief as their most advanced weapons not only failed, but were completely transformed by what appeared to be ancient machinery. Project Eclipse, designed to tear apart the fabric of reality, instead found itself becoming part of a demonstration of why some old knowledge never becomes obsolete. "They're retreating," Marcus announced, monitoring the tactical situation. "Full withdrawal. Even Cortez is pulling back, and taking quite an education with them," Sarah observed, "though I doubt they'll understand what really happened here tonight." Through their surveillance system, they watched as the syndicate forces abandoned their sophisticated equipment, now transformed into inert metal by the workshop's defensive systems. The night had become a lesson in why some old crafts survive. Not because they're simple, but because they understand truths that modern science is only beginning to rediscover. "Sir," James called out, "intercepted communications suggest they're calling in some kind of cleanup team, top-level security clearance. They're trying to prevent anyone from learning about what happened here." "Let them try," Ezra replied calmly, beginning the process of powering down his defensive systems. "Some knowledge can't be contained by security classifications. It lives in the work of craftsmen who understand that the deepest mysteries often hide in plain sight." The night had taught the Cortez Syndicate a lesson they wouldn't soon forget. They had brought the most advanced technology available, only to be defeated by principles so old they predated written history. In trying to take over a simple workshop, they had instead discovered why some old knowledge demands respect, not because it's traditional, but because it's true. The retreat of the Cortez Syndicate left an eerie silence in their wake. The workshop, once the site of a battle that defined modern understanding of physics, now stood still, its ancient mechanisms gradually winding down. the final vestiges of temporal energy dissipated into the night, leaving only the subtle hum of well-oiled gears as a testament to what had transpired. Ezra exhaled slowly, his hands hovering over the control panel as the last of the defensive systems powered down. The workshop had held firm, proving that knowledge passed through generations could stand against the bleeding edge of scientific warfare. His gaze swept over his team, each of them still caught in the weight of what had just occurred. "Lisa, James, begin diagnostics on all systems. I want a full report on structural integrity and energy retention." He turned to Sarah and Marcus. "We need to prepare for whatever comes next. The Syndicate won't accept this defeat quietly." Lisa, still, captivated by the readouts, barely heard him. "Ezra, there's something else. The energy readings from the containment grid, they're not fading like they should." Sarah's fingers flew across the interface, eyes widening. "She's right. The harmonic resonance from the wheels, it's maintaining a stable energy field. But the readings are different now. They're refined." Ezra studied the patterns forming across the screen, the familiar motions of the wheels now etched with a new complexity. "Of course," he murmured, "by stabilizing the temporal distortions, we inadvertently structured them into something new. The workshop isn't just defending itself anymore, it's evolving." James looked up sharply. "You're saying the workshop absorbed the energy and learned from it?" Ezra nodded. "Not in a conscious way, but in the way all great crafts do. Adaptation through function. What the Syndicate intended as destruction became an opportunity for refinement. The principles behind the wheels, the cyclical nature of motion, it all ties back to something deeper than modern science can explain." Marcus, watching the perimeter monitors, stiffened. "Ezra, we've got movement, a different signature, not Syndicate forces." The screen displayed a convoy of unmarked vehicles approaching under the cover of darkness, their formation precise and disciplined. "Government?" Sarah asked. "Possible. But they knew exactly when to arrive," Ezra muttered. "Whoever they are, they've been watching." Lisa exchanged a glance with James. "Should we prepare the defenses again?" Ezra considered for a moment before shaking his head. "No, not yet. Let's see what they want. We've already demonstrated what happens when someone underestimates us. Let's see if these people are any wiser." The convoy stopped just beyond the workshop's outer perimeter. A single figure stepped forward, bathed in the glow of headlights. He was older, dressed in a dark suit that spoke of quiet authority rather than overt aggression. Ezra activated the workshop's external communication system. "You've come a long way," he called out. "I hope you brought something more than threats," the man smiled faintly. "Ezra Caldwell, we've been following your work for some time. You just proved something many in our circles have long suspected." He gestured toward the workshop. "That ancient knowledge still has a place in shaping the future." Ezra's eyes narrowed. "And who exactly are you?" The Syndicate forces watched in disbelief as their most advanced weapons not only failed, but were completely transformed by what appeared to be ancient machinery. Project Eclipse, designed to tear apart the fabric of reality, instead found itself becoming part of a demonstration of why some old knowledge never becomes obsolete. "They're retreating," Marcus announced, monitoring the tactical situation. "Full withdrawal. Even Cortez is pulling back. And taking quite an education with them," Sarah observed, "though I doubt they'll understand what really happened here tonight." Through their surveillance system, they watched as the Syndicate forces abandoned their sophisticated equipment, now transformed into inert metal by the workshop's defensive systems. The night had become a lesson in why some old crafts survive, not because they're simple, but because they understand truths that modern science is only beginning to rediscover. "Sir," James called out. "Intercepted communications suggest they're calling in some kind of cleanup team, top-level security clearance. They're trying to prevent anyone from learning about what happened here." "Let them try," Ezra replied calmly, beginning the process of powering down his defensive systems. Some knowledge can't be contained by security classifications. It lives in the work of craftsmen who understand that the deepest mysteries often hide in plain sight. The night had taught the Cortez Syndicate a lesson they wouldn't soon forget. They had brought the most advanced technology available, only to be defeated by principles so old they predated written history. In trying to take over a simple workshop, they had instead discovered why some old knowledge demands respect, not because it's traditional, but because it's true. The retreat of the Cortez Syndicate left an eerie silence in their wake. The workshop, once the site of a battle that defined modern understanding of physics, now stood still, its ancient mechanisms gradually winding down. The final vestiges of temporal energy dissipated into the night, leaving only the subtle hum of well-oiled gears as a testament to what had transpired. Ezra exhaled slowly, his hands hovering over the control panel as the last of the defensive systems powered down. The workshop had held firm, proving that knowledge passed through generations could stand against the bleeding edge of scientific warfare. His gaze swept over his team, each of them still caught in the weight of what had just occurred. "Lisa, James, begin diagnostics on all systems. I want a full report on structural integrity and energy retention." He turned to Sarah and Marcus. "We need to prepare for whatever comes next. The Syndicate won't accept this defeat quietly." Lisa, still, captivated by the readouts, barely heard him. "Ezra, there's something else. The energy readings from the containment grid. They're not fading like they should." Sarah's fingers flew across the interface, eyes widening. "She's right. The harmonic resonance from the wheels. It's maintaining a stable energy field, but the readings are different now. They're refined." Ezra studied the patterns forming across the screen, the familiar motions of the wheels now etched with a new complexity. "Of course," he murmured. "By stabilizing the temporal distortions, we inadvertently structured them into something new. The workshop isn't just defending itself anymore, it's evolving." James looked up sharply. "You're saying the workshop absorbed the energy and learned from it?" Ezra nodded. "Not in a conscious way, but in the way all great crafts do. Adaptation through function. What the Syndicate intended as destruction became an opportunity for refinement. The principles behind the wheels, the cyclical nature of motion, it all ties back to something deeper than modern science can explain." Marcus, watching the perimeter monitors, stiffened. "Ezra, we've got movement. A different signature. Not Syndicate forces." The screen displayed a convoy of unmarked vehicles approaching under the cover of darkness, their formation precise and disciplined. "Government?" Sarah asked. "Possible, but they knew exactly when to arrive," Ezra muttered. "Whoever they are, they've been watching." Lisa exchanged a glance with James. "Should we prepare the defenses again?" Ezra considered for a moment before shaking his head. "No, not yet. Let's see what they want. We've already demonstrated what happens when someone underestimates us. Let's see if these people are any wiser." The convoy remained still at the edge of the workshop's perimeter, their presence a silent challenge. Ezra took a steady breath, signaling his team to remain alert but not hostile. The last thing they needed was another confrontation before they understood the new players in the game. Evelyn Carter stepped forward again, her gaze unwavering. "You've proven something tonight, Ezra. That knowledge isn't just power. It's survival, and survival often depends on alliances." Ezra tilted his head slightly. "And I suppose you're here to offer one?" She gave a measured nod. "If you're willing to listen." Silence stretched between them. The rhythmic ticking of gears filled the air, an ancient sound in contrast to the modern tension settling over the scene. Finally, Ezra exhaled and gestured toward the workshop. "Then let's talk." Evelyn motioned to one of her people, a tall man with an analytical gaze, before following Ezra inside. Lisa, Sarah, and James exchanged wary glances, but stayed close, their unspoken agreement clear. They would not let Ezra face this alone. Inside the workshop, the controlled hum of machinery underscored the moment. The room felt different now, as if it had absorbed not just energy, but the weight of everything that had transpired. Ezra leaned against the work table, arms crossed. "Start talking." Evelyn didn't hesitate. "The Cortez Syndicate isn't the only group with an interest in what you've built here. There are others, some you'd recognize. Governments, corporations, others operate in shadows, even deeper than Cortez. What happened tonight won't stay buried. The existence of this place, of you, has changed the playing field." Sarah narrowed her eyes. "And your organization, where do you fit into all of this?" "We monitor, protect, and, when necessary, intervene. We don't take knowledge and lock it away, but we do make sure it doesn't end up in the wrong hands. The question is, where do you stand?" Ezra studied her carefully. "And if we say no," Evelyn's expression remained neutral, "then you go on as you were. But understand this, after tonight, there will be no returning to obscurity. The Syndicate will regroup and others will come. You need allies," Lisa scoffed, "and you think we should trust you." "Trust is earned," Evelyn admitted. "But consider this. We could have arrived guns blazing, claiming this place for ourselves. Instead, we're here, talking. That should tell you something." Ezra tapped a finger against the work table, considering. "And what exactly are you offering?" "A partnership, resources, protection, information. We won't take control of your work, but we will help ensure it isn't used against you, or the world." James exhaled. "And in return?" "Collaboration. There are things we know that could help you, just as there are things you understand that no one else does. We're not asking for ownership, Ezra. We're offering a chance to shape what happens next." The weight of the decision pressed against Ezra. He looked at his team, seeing the same uncertainty, the same cautious hope. They had built something unique, something powerful. The question was how to protect it without losing control of it. Finally, he nodded. "We'll listen. But this knowledge, it doesn't belong to anyone, not me, not you. If we do this, it's on our terms." Evelyn smiled faintly. "Agreed." As the deal was struck, the gears of the workshop turned on. Not just mechanically, but metaphorically. The future had been set into motion, a future where the old and the new, the ancient and the cutting edge, would have to find balance. For now, the night was quiet, but the world had taken notice, and nothing would ever be the same again. Dawn broke over the Vermont Valley, painting the workshop in shades of amber and gold. The night's extraordinary events had left their mark not in destruction, but in subtle changes that only those who truly understood the craft could perceive. The wheels turned with a new precision, their motion incorporating knowledge gained from the confrontation with forces that should have torn reality apart. Ezra stood at his workbench, examining blueprints while Evelyn Carter and her team set up sophisticated monitoring equipment around the workshop. The merger of ancient craft and modern protection was already taking shape, though not without tension. "Your equipment," Ezra observed, watching them work. "It's designed to detect temporal anomalies." Evelyn nodded, adjusting a particularly complex device. "Among other things. What happened here last night? It wasn't just a victory over the Syndicate. You've discovered something that changes our understanding of fundamental physics." "Not discovered," Ezra corrected, his weathered hands tracing the outline of a wheel design. "Remembered. This knowledge has always been here, encoded in the principles of the craft. Modern science is just catching up to what wheelwrights have known for centuries, Sarah approached, carrying readings from their latest diagnostics. The workshop's energy patterns have stabilized, but they're different now. The mechanical systems aren't just responding to forces, they're anticipating them. Evolution through function, Evelyn mused, studying the data. Your defense against Project Eclipse didn't just redirect their temporal attacks, it integrated the underlying principles into the very structure of your mechanical systems. Lisa emerged from checking the perimeter sensors, which means the next time someone tries something like that, they'll find themselves facing not just ancient craft knowledge, Ezra finished, but that knowledge enhanced by its interaction with modern physics. The wheels remember in their way, James called out from his communication station. Movement. On the long-range sensors, multiple vehicles approaching from the south. Not the syndicate, Marcus added, checking thermal signatures. Different pattern. Military, maybe? Evelyn checked her secure phone. Government response team. They're aware something significant happened here, but they don't know what. My organization has been selective about what information we've shared. Ezra raised an eyebrow. And what exactly have you shared? Only what's necessary to ensure your protection without compromising your independence, she replied. As promised, we're here to preserve knowledge, not control it. The approaching vehicles stopped at the valley's edge, maintaining a respectful distance. Through their surveillance system, they could see officials in suits examining equipment left behind by the syndicate's hasty retreat. They're scanning for radiation, temporal distortion, anything that might explain what happened, James reported. But the workshop's already processed and transformed all that energy. Let them look, Ezra said calmly. Some knowledge can't be measured with instruments. It has to be understood through experience, through the work itself. Sarah studied them, latest readings from their diagnostic systems. The quantum field interactions from last night, they've changed more than just our defenses. The whole workshop seems to be operating on a deeper level of mechanical integration. Because it learned, Evelyn observed. Not in the way a computer learns, but in the way a craft evolves. Each challenge, each application of force becomes part of its fundamental nature. Marcus called out from his station. More movement, different direction, private vehicles this time, local traffic. Through their monitors, they watched as familiar trucks and cars began their morning commute along the valley roads. The regular rhythm of rural life continuing, unaware of how reality itself had been transformed just hours before. This is what we're really protecting, Ezra said softly. Not just knowledge or power, but the ability for ordinary life to continue while extraordinary forces shape the world around it. Evelyn nodded thoughtfully. Which is exactly why my organization wants to work with you, not control you. You understand something fundamental about how knowledge should exist in the world, not isolated in laboratories, but integrated into the fabric of daily life. 1 month after the confrontation with the Cortez Syndicate, the Vermont Valley had settled into a new kind of normal. To casual observers, Ezra's workshop appeared unchanged, just another weathered building where an aging craftsman practiced his traditional trade. But those who knew where to look could see the subtle signs of transformation. Another request from the Department of Energy, James announced from his communication station, now elegantly integrated into what appeared to be an antique cabinet. They're still trying to understand how we contained those temporal distortions. Let them wonder, Sarah replied, adjusting calibrations on a wheel system that had evolved far beyond its original design. Some things can't be understood through pure analysis. The partnership with Evelyn's organization had proven surprisingly beneficial. True to her word, they provided protection and resources while respecting the workshop's independence. Their presence in the valley was subtle, A few monitoring stations disguised as agricultural equipment, occasional patrols that looked like ordinary traffic. "Perimeter scan complete," Marcus reported. "The ground modifications have stabilized. The entire property is now essentially one integrated mechanical system." Ezra nodded, his hands working a piece of wood that would become part of their latest innovation. The workshop's evolution hadn't stopped with defending against Project Eclipse. It had sparked a renaissance in his understanding of how ancient craft principles could be applied to modern challenges. Ms. Carter's team picked up some interesting chatter, Lisa called out. "Seems the Cortez Syndicate has been restructuring. A little demonstration apparently caused quite a stir in certain circles." "Not just the Syndicate," Evelyn added, entering the workshop with her usual measured grace. "Every major player in the field is reassessing their assumptions about the relationship between old knowledge and new technology." The morning sun streamed through windows that now served as both light sources and sophisticated sensors, each pane of glass incorporating principles learned from the confrontation. The workshop hummed with a subtle energy, not the raw power of modern technology, but something deeper, more fundamental. The Quantum Mechanics Division at MIT has been studying the residual effects in the valley, Evelyn continued, setting down a folder filled with research papers. "Their conclusions are interesting." "Let me guess." Ezra smiled slightly, not looking up from his work. "They can't explain how mechanical systems based on ancient principles managed to stabilize. Temporal distortions that should have torn reality apart." "More than that," she replied. "They're beginning to question their basic assumptions about the nature of time, space, and motion. Your wheels didn't just defeat advanced technology. They proved that some old knowledge runs deeper than our modern understanding of physics." A familiar truck appeared on their surveillance feeds, Maria Chen returning from her voluntary exile during the confrontation. She'd been understandably shocked to learn the truth about her neighbor, but had proven remarkably adaptable. "The valley's changing," Sarah observed, watching more vehicles pass by. "Not just physically, but in how it feels. The workshop's influence is spreading, subtle but undeniable." She was right. The mechanical principles that had evolved during the battle now extended far beyond the workshop's walls. The entire property had become a demonstration of how ancient craft knowledge could reshape reality itself. "We've had inquiries from traditional craftsmen worldwide," James reported. "Wheelwrights, blacksmiths, carpenters, people who work with basic mechanical principles. Something about what happened here has resonated with them." "Because they understand," Ezra replied, testing the balance of a newly carved wheel. "Every craft that survives through generations carries within it truths that transcend our modern categories of knowledge." The wheel in his hands wasn't just a piece of worked wood, it was an expression of principles that predated written history. Each groove, each carefully calculated curve, incorporated both ancient wisdom and the new understanding gained from their confrontation with Project Eclipse. "The Syndicate's weapons didn't fail because they weren't powerful enough," Evelyn mused, watching him work. "They failed because they approached reality from the wrong direction. They tried to force their will upon it, while your wheels work with the fundamental nature of things." An alert sounded, soft but insistent. Marcus moved to his monitoring station, studying the readings. "Energy fluctuation in Sector 3. The residual temporal effects are acting up again." But this time there was no concern in his voice. The workshop's systems, evolved and refined through experience, automatically began adjusting. Wheels turned, gears shifted, and reality itself seemed to flex and stabilize. "Beautiful," Sarah breathed, watching the mechanical response. "The integration is perfect. No wasted motion, no forced corrections. The systems aren't just maintaining stability, they're enhancing it." "Because they've learned," Ezra explained, setting down his tools to watch the process. "Not like a computer learns, But like a craft evolves, each challenge, each application of force becomes part of its fundamental nature. Through their monitors, they could see the effect rippling through the valley. The workshop's influence had created zones of enhanced stability, areas where the basic principles of reality operated with greater clarity and precision. "Your neighbors have noticed, you know," Evelyn commented. "Not consciously, perhaps, but they feel it. The valley feels right in a way they can't explain." "As it should," Ezra replied. "True knowledge doesn't impose itself. It integrates, becomes part of the natural flow of things." The morning continued, sunlight catching the workshop's wheels in ways that suggested geometry's modern mathematics was only beginning to understand. Outside, the valley went about its normal routine, unaware that ancient principles encoded in wood and metal were quietly maintaining the stability of reality itself. "We've completed the preliminary documentation," Lisa announced, organizing files that contained their observations of the workshop's evolution. "Though I doubt anyone without direct experience could really understand what's happened here." "That's the point," Ezra said, returning to his workbench. "Some knowledge can't be contained in papers or formulas. It has to be lived, experienced, passed down through the work itself." The workshop's wheels continued their eternal motion, each turn expressing principles that had survived millennia, not because they were simple, but because they were true. The confrontation with the syndicate hadn't just been a victory, it had been a demonstration of why some knowledge transcends time itself. "What happens now?" Sarah asked, watching new patterns form in their monitoring systems. "We continue," Ezra replied simply. "We work, we learn, we pass on what we know to those who understand that the deepest truths often hide in the simplest forms." The sun climbed higher over the Vermont Valley, its light catching wheel-turned patterns that contained more wisdom than any modern physics textbook. The workshop stood as it always had, a guardian of knowledge that was both ancient and eternally new. Inside, the wheels turned, expressing truths that had survived empires and revolutions, wars and technological upheavals. They turned not just to defend against forces that would disrupt reality, but to maintain the delicate balance that allowed ordinary life to continue in extraordinary times. And in his workshop, Ezra Thane continued his work, knowing that some battles are won not through force or technology, but through understanding truths so fundamental they transcend time itself. The wheels would keep turning, the knowledge would endure, and the valley would remain protected by principles older than history itself. For in the end, the greatest power lies not in dominating reality, but in understanding it deeply enough to work in harmony with its most fundamental nature. This was the true secret of the Wheelwright, a secret that would continue to shape the world long after the last echo of Project Eclipse had faded into memory. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.